The movie begins by showing a young Henry who has not felt any effects on his body since he was a child. As the years pass, Henry orders a meal as usual, but because he doesn't know how hot the food is, he has to cool it down with ice cubes. He just doesn't know what pain is, only in theory. That's how nature taught to protect living organisms, but even she makes mistakes sometimes. A little later, Henry decides to take a walk as he wants to do some shopping. He even re-sticks a couple of price tags, hoping to save money, and notices a man at the checkout with obvious symptoms of an immune system attack on his own body. It's all because of Henry's extensive knowledge of biology. Toward evening, he begins to create therapeutic drugs that he will sell to junkies in the future. During the ride home, Henry accidentally runs into a girl. Hot coffee immediately gets on his hand, but he asks not to worry about it. After which he immediately gives himself first aid, because even if he does not feel pain, the body responds to stimuli as usual. And seeing all this, a girl from the subway once again decides to approach him. Her name is Shawnee, and she is very interested in his well-being. Before leaving, Henry gives her his ampoule, which will help with any ailments. After coming home, Henry takes a bath, very clearly checking the temperature on the thermometer. A new day comes, where Henry comes to the medical center. There, Dr. Raymond does his first checkup and asks if Henry has decided to visit the Rare Disease Center as an example to the children, and Henry promises to visit. Leaving the hospital, he is immediately stopped by Dr. Stephen. He wants to make sure Henry is a suitable candidate. His group is working on painkillers, but lately they have reached a ceiling, and only Henry will be able to help advance the research, which in turn will help thousands of people. And in gratitude, Henry will become rich. But he's not really interested in that, taking us back to the lab. There he tries every day to develop a drug that can cure him. He is distracted by a call from the Center for Rare Diseases, but Henry is too busy. He manages to find a drug called Thebaine, but it's not readily available, forcing Henry to go back to Raymond and ask him to get him Thebaine. The doctor says it's forbidden, but Henry can try to get help from the pharmaceutical company. Henry doesn't understand, because there are too few people like him on this planet, and it would just be unprofitable for the big companies. And then he mentions Dr. Stephen and his experiments. Hearing all this, Raymond asks him to forget about the idea before it's too late. Then Henry visits his acquaintance, who also can't help. There is only one thing left to do, to check what Dr. Stephen is doing. Luckily for Henry, he gives the go-ahead to find Thebaine and immediately starts the first tests. A little later, Stephen admits that he, like Henry, is different. However, in his case, it's quite the opposite. He's overly sensitive. Before going home, Henry gets the idea to visit Shawnee, who is very surprised by the addition of ice to her coffee. But that doesn't stop her from asking him out on a date. And since Henry won't agree to go anywhere, she leaves her phone number just in case. All the next day, Henry tries to get the promised substance, but Stephen tries to convey that he can cure him if he wants it himself. But here Henry has other plans, to continue his experiments. And tomorrow he does decide to meet Shawnee, who offers to ride her motorcycle, which scares Henry pretty badly, encouraging him to go back to Stephen again, moving on to a new stage of the experiment, where they conduct tests literally on Henry's brain. Even so, he doesn't feel any effects. Another day comes, but this time Henry asks for stem cells, casually mentioning that he's been to Stephen's house. Dr. Raymond begins to tell a story from when they were still working together. One day, Stephen violated protocols on the dosing of a drug, thus eliminating his test subjects. In fact, Stephen is obsessed with his ideas, and Henry should stay away from him. A little while later, the duo meet again. Henry even manages to overcome his fear and goes for a motorcycle ride. He even admits to Shawnee that he is different. From that day on, they become a couple. But one day, everything changes. Dr. Stephen finds Henry again to ask him to continue his experiments, not realizing that he already knows about his past failures, which Stephen considers a line of business. Toward evening, the duo visit a restaurant and have a romantic dinner. But their idyll is interrupted by Shawnee's acquaintance, trying in every way to take her away. Of course, Henry can't stand it, and a scuffle ensues, at the end of which Henry decides to leave the meeting. And no matter how much Shawnee asks him to stop, Henry doesn't change his mind. Henry returns to his lab to continue his research, gathering a lot of data from the internet. He notices the SCN9A gene. With this news, Henry visits Stephen, and they begin analyzing the genes. Turns out Henry was right after all, and he's sure he knows how to fix it, but he can't do it alone. The group decides to do gene therapy so that the healthy cells themselves solve the problem. A couple days later, Shawnee decides to visit Henry. She says she only wants good things for him, but his stuck-up idea of being like everyone else keeps him from realizing he's making a mistake. So Henry just chases her away. A little while later, Henry visits Stephen again, asking for the samples, but Stephen realizes that he wants to test the cure on himself, and because of this, the company will be in big trouble. So Stephen has no intention of giving him the samples. Henry waits until everyone leaves to sneak into the lab and take the sample, and when he gets home, he intends to test it on himself. In the morning, Raymond visits Henry, as he did not answer the phone, not realizing that he has managed to find the key to his problem. The only thing left to do is to test that key. Raymond is trying to convey that all the research should be done first, because changing genes is literally suicide if something goes wrong. Hearing all of this, Henry can't contain his emotions, once again abstracted from the people who genuinely want to help him. But this dialogue informs him that there is no need to rush. Life is more valuable, and while he is still alive, he should come to Shawnee again. But he didn't have the courage to finish what he had started. Instead, he again visits Stephen, stating that he suspended the experiments from the realization that if the drug does not work, he will die. But here Stephen doesn't understand how it was possible to abandon the case at the final stage, which he has been working towards all his life. This leads Henry to believe that Stephen wanted him to steal the drug from the beginning, knowing that Henry wasn't going to wait for official tests. From the beginning, Henry was a lab mouse to eventually cure Stephen himself. Hearing all of this, Henry only finally withdraws from the tests. A few days pass. Shawnee once again visits Henry's apartment, but by this time, all of his belongings have disappeared. But there's a letter waiting for her, saying that she's shown him that he's capable of more. So he decided to leave town for a while to help the kids at the Rare Disease Center. He realized that the most important thing in life is to do what makes you happy, and the rest doesn't matter. And that's where the movie ends.